about this, right? So economics, right? And there was a request. I think shout out to Nick had asked that I talk about Keynesianism. So folks, we know what Marxism is. We've been talking Marxism on here nonstop about the need for a socialist society. But what is Keynesianism? What is Keynesianism? So John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes was an economist. He was a British economist, and he was around during the Great Depression. And he saw that what they call classical economics or liberal economics wasn't working out too well. Right? There was a problem that he called underconsumption. Right? He argued that Marx was wrong. Marx's theory of overproduction was wrong. But during certain time periods, you have what you call underconsumption. And underconsumption is when people aren't buying the goods, right? The store is full of products, but people can't afford to buy it. You have underconsumption. And I appreciate that. I try to do as many as I can. Thank you, E.E. Camp. I will do more lives. So you have a problem of underconsumption. That's what John Maynard Keynes said. He said the Marxist theory that it's overproduction and the workers must control the means of production, we can just throw that out. But John Maynard Keynes said there is this problem of underconsumption. So the way you solve it is you spend money. The government must spend money. And John Maynard Keynes, he very famously said, only a madman or an economist would think that the most despicable men, for the most despicable of reasons, would work in the interests of all. And that you need the state to control the economy to some degree or other because capitalists are despicable men who just want to make lots of money. Right? And he was a critic of classical economics, right? Adam Smith, greed is good, profits in command, people voting with their dollars, the market resolves everything. That's classical economics, right? Neoliberalism is like an amped up version of that came out in the 70s, but that's classical economics. That's just straight up supply and demand, invisible hand, right? Competition creates the best product. This is classic free market stuff. We've learned this all. That's classical economics. John Maynard Keynes, during the Great Depression in the 30s, saw that this was not working. He also hated communism. He was not a Marxist. So John Maynard Keynes said you have to have the government spend money. A classic expression of John Maynard Keynes' economic theory was he said you hire a worker to go and dig a hole. And you pay him a wage to go and dig the hole. You then hire some other workers to go and fill that hole in. And some would say that's a waste of money. But that man who dug that hole, he got a wage. He then spends money, buys things with that wage, and that solves and resolves the crisis of underconsumption. That's Keynesian economics. The government must spend money in times of economic crisis in order to get the economy going again. And the bailout. What was the bailout? Right, TARP, right? During the financial crisis, Obama, he spent government money. He bailed out the banks. They paid it back, in theory. That was a bailout. Keynesian, right? Another great example, probably a great example, because one of the problems with the bank bailout, the reason it didn't ultimately solve the problem, right? You remember the economy was still bad right after that because, you bailed out the people who already have lots of money, the banks, right? And they still weren't lending any money, right? And I remember there was congressional hearings and they're yelling at the bankers, we bailed you out and you're not lending any money. Why are they not lending money? Because they weren't going to make a profit from lending the money. They weren't going to make a profit from lending the money, right? Because no one had any money. So why would they lend people money if they're not going to get it paid back, right? Banks lend money in order to get paid back and make interest, right? And so they bailed out the banks, and then Congress was mad at the banks. How dare you not spend money? Well, why wouldn't they spend any? Why would they lend money to people who can't pay it back? So that was a weird moment, but a more Keynesian kind of thing that Obama did was cash for clunkers. You remember cash for clunkers? That was, the government bought cars from people, old beat-up cars, and bought them, and gave people money for it, and then people went and bought new cars, right? And so there was not a problem of overproduction in the car industry, right? People couldn't afford to buy cars. They weren't buying cars, so Obama started the cash for clunkers program, Americans with beat-up cars sold them, got the money, and bought new cars. And it was somewhat successful. It helped the auto industry, get the auto industry going after it got bailed out. It was a Keynesian idea. Keynesian economics basically says that the way you get an economy going is the government spends money. And it doesn't really say what the government should spend the money on. It just says, when things are bad, have the government spend lots of money. And this is what gets left out. Many people don't realize this, but Nazi Germany was a kind of Keynesian economics, but it was a special kind of Keynesian economics. It wasn't simply the government spending money. It was the government spending money to do certain things, right? Keynesianism can create welfare states, right? Giving people free health care is Keynesian. Giving people government-guaranteed jobs, that's Keynesian, right? The Works Progress Administration, where Roosevelt hired all kinds of people to build bridges and highways and all kinds of stuff during the Great Depression, that was Keynesian. But Nazi economics is a knockoff of Keynesianism. It's different than Keynesian economics. Nazi economics, Schachtian economics, the economist of the Nazis, of the Third Reich, Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler's banker. He believed in this Keynesian principle, the government must spend money when things are going badly, but he believed in it in a specific way. Hjalmar Schacht was the creator of the first military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex. Germany had signed the Versailles Treaty, and under the Versailles Treaty, it was not allowed to have a military. Well, Hitler ripped up the Versailles Treaty and created a German military. And so all kinds of German corporations, like Volkswagen, Krupp, Tyson, all kinds of people were put to work, and lots of jobs were created making guns, bombs, and tanks. And the German government spent lots of money, and it taxed people, and it spent lots of money. And the German state created what was really the first military-industrial complex. What else did the Nazi state do? The Nazi state also had the first prison-industrial complex, right? What did Hitler do as soon as he took power? He, Reichstag fire, rounded up all the Communist Party leaders, put them in concentration camps, rounded up all the Social Democratic leaders, put them in concentration camps, rounded up all the trade union activists, put them in concentration camps. And that was, for the first couple years, all the left in Germany, all the leaders of the left were in labor camps. And they did forced labor, right? The peat bog soldiers. There's a famous song from these communist political prisoners, the peat bog soldiers. And they had to work in a peat bog, and they were treated awful. I mean, they were doing miserable hard labor in these bogs, getting peat, like peat moss, which is used in industry, right? And but when you did that, first of all, there was mass unemployment in Germany. Well, if you take thousands and thousands of people and put them in concentration camps, they're not looking for jobs. They're not competing with the other people for jobs. Plus, you get lots of people who get new jobs as concentration camp guards. Plus, you get lots of people who make money building those big camps and maintaining them, right? And you had a prison industrial complex. And they also built the Autobahns. That was another big thing. Schacht came up with the idea they needed to have highways across Germany. So Hjalmar Schacht, he built the Autobahns. And Nazi Germany was Keynesian in its economic policies. Barely any nationalizations. There were a few nationalizations, but mostly they didn't nationalize stuff. It wasn't National Socialism. The socialism part of National Socialism, it was kind of meaningless. And there was a big fight in the Nazi Party about what National Socialism actually meant, where Gregor Strasser and some of the weird, Strasser, they were arguing that the Nazi state should be more quote unquote socialistic, and Hitler didn't agree with that, and they purged, and then on the night of the long knives, they executed all the ones who advocated more economic, nationalist stuff. They killed them all, and the Nazi state, the socialism part of National Socialism meant that all business should be loyal to the nation. That's basically all it meant, right? It meant that, businesses must be loyal to the homeland. It had no meaning whatsoever. It was, and even before that, the Strasser people, they were anti-Semitic and hateful, and they hated communists, and I mean, it was never a left group, but they had some interesting, weird economic theories about like craftsmen and stuff like that, and whatever. That was all done. So the Nazi state, though, comes to power in 1933. By 1935, it had created an economic boom. And how did they do it? Well, they put a huge chunk of the population in prison camps. They put a huge chunk of the population in military uniforms. They started spending money like crazy on military production. And on top of that, they built these Autobahns. And they ripped up the Versailles Treaty and stopped paying back reparations to the Western countries. Those were big, dramatic economic moves, and they created a huge amount of economic growth. And it was Keynesian, right? It was government spending money in order to abet a crisis, and it was successful. But you have to remember, what were they doing in order to do that? They were taking people out of the workforce. That was, I mean, the prison system, the concentration camp system, was about eliminating people from the labor market. Not employing people, but eliminating from the labor market. And it was about building mechanisms for destruction. Not building schools, not building hospitals. I'm sure they did a little bit of that, but it was mainly about building mechanisms for war and destruction, imprisoning people, creating slave labor. The Nazi state used slave prison labor. That was a big part of it, slave prison labor, right? To build those Volkswagen, Volkswagen factories had concentration camp prisoners working at them. The Nazi state, it was about, you take a section of the working class and you beat them down and you force them to do slave labor and you just deprive them of rights and you start impoverishing big sections of your society, and you can create an economic boom. That's Schachtian economics. It's different than Keynes. It's very different than Keynes. Very, very different than Keynes. Right? It's a specific kind of economics that's focused primarily on reducing the population level and reducing to poverty certain sections of your country. What more is the Nazi state was actively trying to reduce its population. Right? People don't realize this, but one of the big things the Nazis did was try to reduce their own population. All right? And they actively were trying to reduce their population. They passed laws saying that if anyone had any hereditary problem, they could not reproduce. Right? They, and they even applied to like political dissidents and stuff. They mass sterilizations. They started exterminating disabled people. They had this poster. They talked about useless eaters. The disabled people, they called them useless eaters, and were exterminating them. The Nazi state was actively reducing its population in order to stimulate the economy, right? Complete opposite of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was drastically trying to increase its population. They had a medal called Mother of the Soviet Union. And any woman who bore more than 10 children got this medal. And she was a mother of the Soviet Union. And they pushed that, right? And the Soviet government was constantly trying to expand its population because the more people they had, the more labor those people would do, and the greater the surplus would be, and the more the economy would expand. Nazi Germany and Schachtian economics was about impoverishing people, enslaving people, building mechanisms of death with the military, and reducing the population, exterminating useless eaters, and eventually building concentration camp. Towards the end of the 1930s, they start rounding up Jews and homosexuals, and we all know what happened at Auschwitz and all of that, right? So the Nazi state, despite the fact that it had some weird pseudo, quote unquote, they called themselves progressive in various instances, they were about reducing the population, militarizing destruction, and trying to resolve an economic crisis with mass destruction. That was essentially the basis of Nazi economics. It was a specific kind of Keynesianism, a Keynesianism that was inherently destructive and backward-looking, right? Rooseveltian Keynesianism was very different. Roosevelt was constantly trying to build up the United States, build infrastructure, build new universities. Read the essays by Vannevar Bush, for example. right? I mean, the U.S. Keynesianism of the Roosevelt era, the Works Progress Administration, was based on constantly trying to expand the population, constantly trying to build up and make people wealthier, and it was a very different kind of Keynesianism. Roosevelt was not a socialist, and we never became a socialist society. There was an alliance between the Roosevelt coalition and the left, but overall, the Roosevelt Keynesianism was forward-thinking, wanted to expand the population, wanted to build up the country. Very different, very, very different mindset. Whereas Schachtian Nazi economics is it's a death economy. That's basically what Schachtian economics is. Schachtian Keynesianism, Nazi economics is death economy. You can call it the death economy. Death economy. It is about we're trying to reboot the economy by building prisons, by building war devices and militarizing, and by exterminating people and reducing the population. It's death economy. That is Nazi economics. Death economy. It's cold, calculated death economy. And after the Second World War, we started adopting death economy mechanisms in the United States. Let's be real. Right? The military-industrial complex. World War II, after the Second World War, as the war was ending, Roosevelt dies. After the war is over, Truman gets in there. Vast, huge military spending, huge selling of arms around the world. We build up our military-industrial complex. They made it blatant, folks. Not only did we do the military-industrial complex, which was straight out of Schacht, straight out of Nazi, on top of that, what did Truman do? He built the interstate highway system for the same reason that the Nazis built the Autobahns. They built the interstate highway system because they said it was to protect from a foreign invasion. They needed a highway system to connect the country in case there was an invasion. And before that, what did we have before we had the interstate highway system? What did we have? Trains. We had the railroads. Well, all the railroads were bought up by the big oil companies, dismantled, and to replace trains, which are much more efficient, much less dangerous in terms of car accidents. If you've ever had a relative or someone you know die in a car accident, you should be furious because prior to the Second World War, prior to the 1950s, we had a huge train railroad system in the United States. You go to Europe, go to Britain, they have a train system. Go to France, they have a train system. We used to have one of those in the USA. We ripped it up. The oil companies bought up the railways, and on top of that, the government, the federal government, just like the Nazis, built the Autobahns. At the time, we were having a prison-industrial complex, or a military-industrial complex. At the same time we were doing that, we built this huge interstate highway system. So now we have car culture and gas guzzlers and all of that. Truman started us down the road to a military-industrial complex. Next, right, we remember that Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican, actually warned the public about, as he's leaving office, he warned the public about the dangers of the military-industrial complex. Because he, as a Republican, as a conservative, as a military guy himself, was alarmed about how essential, when the facts were laid before him, how essential military spending was to the U.S. economy. It scared him. A Republican, a conservative, a military guy, Dwight Eisenhower, was scared. Ike, right? We like Ike. He saw from the White House how much the U.S. economy was not a free market economy. It was a Keynesian economy based on government spending. If the government stopped spending money, the economy would collapse in a week, right? Even in the 50s when it was a booming economy, he realized the only thing that kept the U.S. economy rolling on was military spending. The USA was a military-industrial complex, military Keynesianism. Military Keynesianism. That was the basis of the U.S. economy. Military Keynesianism, military spending, profits from war, military production. right? And still today, the USA is overwhelmingly, by a huge amount, the biggest spender on the military and the biggest exporter of military hardware and weapons. It's very hard. If you go to a hardware store, go to Home Depot, the store of Bernie Marcus. Don't go there. I mean, maybe you have to go there, but I'm not advocating anyone shop there. No product placement here. Diet beverage, right? But if you go to Home Depot, try to find any product there that isn't somehow tied in with military production, right? Seriously, General Electric, right? Raytheon, Boeing, right? I mean, the U.S. economy, since the 50s, has been a Keynesian, Schachtian, military-based economy. But then it gets even better. Not better, it actually gets worse. So we had huge amounts of economic growth in the 50s, huge amounts of economic growth in the 60s. In the late 70s, we had the first major economic downturn since the end of the Second World War. 78, Carter's in there, right? First major, huge economic downturn since the end of the Second World War. Around that time, drug use had become far more popular. In the 1960s, drug use was considered very hip and cool. The Beatles were, encouraging people to use drugs, and drugs were hip and cool, and hallucinogens and marijuana, and drug use was everywhere. So in the late 70s, you saw the very beginning of a prison industrial complex, where all of a sudden the rate of incarceration in the United States went through the roof. Right? The Rockefeller drug laws, just say no. Ronald Reagan was all about just say no. He had everyone terrified. Your kids are going to go to a party and smoke some weed sometime and then become, quivering heroin junkies for the rest of their life. So therefore, we have got to lock up all the drug users and war on drugs, and we got to send weapons to Central America to fight the communists because they're all drug users somehow, even though we're giving money to the drug dealers, but we don't talk about that. And oh my goodness, folks, it was, drugs are coming. Drugs are going to come get you. Drug use is awful. I do not endorse drug use. And the left, the other view that drugs are cool and okay, I'm not with that either. But regardless, the lock 'em up movement, right? People don't stop being addicts when you put them in prison, right? People in prison, with a bunch of other addicts, with a bunch of other criminals and gang. I mean, right? The what do you call it? The prison industrial complex, mass incarceration, locking people up in huge numbers, war on drugs, tough on crime, Willie Horton ad, right? Remember the Willie Horton ad, right? It was that was the 80s. That was the 80s, and what was it? It was a huge stimulus to the economy. Prison industrial complex. And what on top of that, we had private companies that started using prison labor. Private companies, folks, they make U.S. military hardware in federal prisons. Look it up. There are, at this very moment, even though it's Saturday night, I can guarantee you in some federal prison somewhere, there are prisoners that are making military hardware. Right? They are not getting paid anything near. They are getting paid far below the civilian minimum wage. Right? Prisoners don't have to get paid the minimum wage. And they're in prison, working round the clock, making military hardware for military contracting companies. Read about it. Airplane parts and uniform parts, all kinds of military products get made by federal prisoners as cheap labor. And private companies that are not even tied in with the military, just regular private companies. They have prisoners taking people's calls. Prisoners as call center workers. They have prisoners sewing together Victoria's Secret, I heard, right? Prison labor is a big thing. Instead of hiring law-abiding citizens outside of the jail who are, required to get paid a minimum wage, oh, no. Oh, no. We got a prisoner who can do it for 2 cents an hour, $1 an hour, whatever you want to call it. Prison labor. Prisons for profit. The government is spending money, right? You got private prisons now, where you have a private company that gets paid for the number of people that get locked up. GEO Group, right? Wells Fargo. folks, right? This is just the same thing that Schacht did in Nazi Germany with the concentration camp system, a prison industrial complex. What the Nazi economist Schacht did with the military industrial complex and the prison industrial complex, that is what the USA, after decades of military industrial complex, when that ran its course and we were still having a crisis of capitalism, we got the second wave, the second step of Schachtian economics. The second step of Schachtian economics was the creation of a prison industrial complex. We have a Nazi death economy in the United States. Let's just be real about it, folks. This isn't a free market economy. It's capitalism that made America great, Caleb. It's capitalism. If the USA had a free market neoclassical economy, this country would have fallen apart decades ago. The USA has been going because the government spends money, but there's this Nazi mentality. We can't spend money giving people free college because that's too nice. That's too kind. Yeah, we're going to spend money in war. Yeah, it's mean. Yeah. Ugh. We can't spend money giving people health care. No, that's too kind. That's too compassionate. So we're going to spend money locking up criminals, locking up people in jail. Yeah. You know, it's this settler mentality. It's like there's certain people, I'm sure you've all met them, they just can't stand to be nice. I kid you not. I mean, it's beyond me. They just cannot stand to be nice. I mean, have you met it's weird. I think it's part of the settler mentality, right? But it's like the idea of helping somebody else, the idea of being kind to somebody else, the idea of someone suffering and we ought to help them just makes them mad. This is like the Ayn Rand libertarian stuff. It's like they understood that compassion is weakness, that helping other people is wrong, and other people, if they're poor, it's their own damn fault and they need to get out of here and I'm mad. It's weird. I would sit in college classes and we'd read statistics about unemployment and poverty and they would just get so angry. The notion that somebody else is suffering and society has an obligation to help them is so threatening to their worldview. It's very scary. It's very, very scary. And a lot of those people believe in free market stuff. But the reality is that mindset, that settler anti-solidarity mindset flows all through U.S. society. It really does. It flows all through U.S. society. There's just a lot of people in the USA who just can't stand the thought of helping someone else. Compassion is weakness. Solidarity is weakness. Collectivism, it's me against the world. Everyone should work hard. If you just, you can do anything you want if you just work hard enough. If everyone just flexes hard, they'll all be billionaires. And it's a certain mindset. And if you have that mindset, but you realize that the government needs to spend money, well, then the government can spend money on prisons and locking people up and punishing people. Yeah, the government can spend money on wars and bombs and tanks to fight commies but the government cannot give people free healthcare, cannot give people free education. This is a death economy. That's death economy, right? I'm not saying that the USA is equivalent of Nazi Germany in this moment or anything like that. You're missing the point. I'm saying that there are economic principles that were applied in the Third Reich by the economist Schacht. And those are the principles through which our leaders in the United States have attempted to manage the U.S. economy. Schachtian economics. Prisons for profit, war profiteering. That's what we have in the United States. Death economy. It's death economy. That is the reality. They preach free market economy in the United States. That's what's preached. You go to the universities, neoclassical economics, neoliberalism, Milton Friedman. That's for people that are stupid. No, I'm serious. That's for people that are stupid enough to believe it, right? That's for the masses. Free to choose by Milton Friedman. That's all. That's for people. That's you're supposed to swallow that. You're supposed to believe that. That's for the masses. That's for average people who want to get into economics, and it's to explain to you that profits are good and socialism is evil, and if we just have the government out of things and profits are corporate, that's propaganda for the masses. What they really believe in is Schachtian economics. They know they need the government to spend money, but they want the government to spend money on militarism. They know they need the government to spend money, but they need the government to spend money on prisons for profit. Right? They have no problem with the government spending money just so long as it doesn't help people. Right? Because helping people is weakness. Right? They're appealing to the worst in people. They tell the story about Nazi Germany. Right? The children in school would be read a story about a rabbit running away from an angry, hungry wolf. At the end of the story, the wolf devours the rabbit. And then they say to the class of school children, they say to them, who's the victim in this story? And of course, the children, being human beings, say, well, this poor rabbit who just wants to live and this wolf is eating him. And the teacher says, no, the victim is the wolf because the rabbit is resisting, and the wolf is the natural superior of the rabbit. And by resisting, that rabbit is depriving the wolf of his natural place in the hierarchy. That's the Nazi death economy mindset. Right? You worship strength. You worship power. You worship rich and wealth. You worship brute force and military strength, and you abhor and have contempt for those who are suffering, who are without, right? That's Nazi philosophy. That's Nazi economics. It's not exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche said. It's a distortion of what Friedrich Nietzsche said, but it's what the Nazis pushed. And they pushed it in their schools, and it was reflected in their economy. Again, did they have a problem with the government spending money? No, just don't spend it on average people, right? And we very much in the United States, our culture has a huge amount of that, right? Our settler culture, the Odinism, right? Odinism. I've talked a lot about American Odinism and the Odinist mindset. And that Odinism, right? In ancient Germany, before Germany was Christianized by the Roman Empire, what did people do? They worshipped Odin, the god of grit, valor, and sacrifice. And when in ancient Germany, when the Norsemen were dying on their beds, they wanted to go to heavens, they would take a knife and slice themselves open in the hope that Odin, the god of grit and valor, would think that they had been killed in a battle and would then allow them into heaven, because the highest way of being was to be a warrior, was to be one who was going hard and sacrificing and killing on the battlefield and risking and strength. And, this was the view of the Norsemen. This was the view of the Goths and the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths and the Vandals. This was the religion. This was the religion of the Vikings. That was the Germanic belief. And the Nazis, interestingly, as much as they officially claimed to be Christian, there was a whole lot. If you read, Alfred Rosenberg, who was one of the big theoreticians of the Nazis, he pushed this kind of paganism. They worshipped Odin. Odinism, right? And that Odinist values, Odinist beliefs, a lot of the Protestant work ethic stuff, and Calvin and stuff, is Odinist. It's a reassertion of some of these Odinist values, right? This notion is that if God loves you, you'll have lots of money. So therefore, the way to be good is to work hard and have lots of money, because then that'll prove that God loved you or something, right? I mean, and American culture has a big element of, we're very German in the United States of America. What's the most popular food? We got hamburgers, that's from Hamburg, Germany. We got hot dogs, aka Frankfurters, right? Coleslaw, most common last name in the United States is Miller, which is Mueller, right? I mean, that Odinism, the Odinist mentality, has found its way into the United States of America, right? I mean, that this is a big part of what we're about. And the fact that we have adopted death economy, Schachtian Nazi economics in many ways, we haven't done it like the Third Reich did. And in Germany, they set up a fascist state, they implemented these economics, boom, 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 created, first there was an economic boom, and then that economic boom started to slow down about 5 years later, and then they started a world war and millions of people died. That's not what we're doing over here, right? It's not like that. We have implemented Schachtian economics very gradually. First, the military-industrial complex for a couple decades. We still got them now, prison-industrial complex. I mean, it's gradual, right? It's not the same kind of situation at all. But it's a reflection of the same kind of values, right? Everyone knows that capitalist neoclassical economics doesn't work. It doesn't work. You have to have the government spend money because of overproduction. You have to control the problem of overproduction. The capitalist, the worker cannot buy back the products he produces, right? I've explained it before. It's a basic mathematical formula. The wages paid to the worker in the process of production are never equivalent to the price of the product. Just doesn't work that way. The capitalist wouldn't make a profit. So, as a result, you have to have the government stimulating the economy to some way or other. But there is this mentality that we have to do it in this Odinist, cruel, death economy way. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Roosevelt didn't think that way. The Soviet Union and China didn't think that way. But for whatever reason, in the United States, since the end of the Second World War, we've adopted death economy. And there are different manifestations of it. On the right, it manifests itself in this war on social programs. On the left, it manifests itself in this kind of belief in primitivism and that growth is bad and that we overpopulation. That is the problem. We have very much adopted kind of this death economy, pessimistic worldview. The way to save our economy, according to both the left and the right, is with destruction. The right believes the way to save the economy is to cut, right? We're going to cut, food stamps. We're going to cut food stamps. We're going to cut government jobs. We're going to cut wages. We're going to cut social spending, cut healthcare. And that's going to save the economy. The left believes the way to save the economy is people need to be less. They need to want less, right? They need to be not as concerned about stuff. We need to get rid of, of all the coal power plants and replace them with windmills. We all need to have electricity for only an hour a day because it's all good for the environment. We all need to stop procreating. We need to reduce the population, and that in the it's a nicer sounding thing, but it's the same idea. The belief of the left in the United States and the right in the United States is the same. That the way to get out of this crisis is with destruction. Do we do it gradually in a kind of nice, voluntary, environmental, anti-consumerist way? Is that how we go backward? Or do we go backward with cuts and prisons and war? How do we go backwards? That's the debate. That is the terms of the debate in the United States. The left says we go backward nicely and collectively and singing Kumbaya, and the right says we go backward meanly and cruelly and harshly. But they all agree that the way we're going to get out of this economic crisis is to move backward. And what I am telling you, and what China has proved to the world, and what Russia has proved to the world, and what has been proved to the world over and over again, is that we can fix this crisis by going forward. We don't have to move backward. We don't have to move backward. We don't have to go backward. Folks, there is no limit to growth. There is only a limit to profits. There is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to profits. There is no limit to growth. There is only a limit to profits. The only reason that you would think that we have to go backward, the only reason you would think we have to go backward is because you think that we can't escape capitalism. Sure, in order to have capitalism, we have to go backward. No question about it. If we're going to maintain capitalism, we have to go backward. Global warming, fossil fuels, we would have to go backward, right? I mean, automation, all kinds of people not having jobs, we would have to go backward. If you believe in capitalism, if you believe in profits, you think we have to go backward, right? Then there's clearly a limit to growth. But if you can understand that if the banks, factories, and industries were organized to serve public good and not profits, if we had a rationally planned economy, if you can understand that, you can realize that we don't have to go backwards. We don't have to go backwards, folks. We do not have to go backwards. There is no limit to growth. There is only a limit to profits. There is no limit to growth. There is only a limit to profits. Automation would be a good thing in a socialist society. It would mean there's less work for everyone to do. However, under capitalism, it creates poverty. There would be no opposition. There would be nothing barring fusion energy. I think if we had socialism in this country, we would have fusion energy in a year. China, what China is doing, sending rovers to the moon to collect helium-3, funding huge amounts of fusion energy resource, they know that we have to get off fossil fuels. Climate change is a reality, folks, and we have to get off fossil fuels. But we cannot do it by just reducing the energy level. We're not going to do that. If you just replace all the coal power plants and all the oil with windmill, it's not going to work. Solar panels aren't going to cut it. We have to find a more efficient energy source. Fusion energy is the future. And thank you, Western communists, for agreeing with me. Fusion energy is the future. There is no limit to growth. Why don't we have fusion energy? Profits. Big oil companies know that fusion energy would put them out of business. Look who the richest people in the world are. Wall Street. Chase Bank, ExxonMobil, BP, that's HSBC Bank, Royal Dutch Shell, Chevron, all those people would be out of a job if we got off of oil. Fusion energy would put them all out of business. And that would end the fact that the world economy was centered around the West. Right? Why does Wall Street and London rule the world? Because they control the oil, and our economy is centered around oil. You ever buy anything plastic? Oil. Right? You ever ride in an airplane? Oil. You ever drive a car? Oil. Oil is the order that we live in. We live in an oil-based economic order. China knows that's a trap. That's a trap for humanity, and they have socialism in China. They have a rationally planned economy. They control the means of production. The Chinese government says, we are going to fund like hell fusion energy. We are going to send a rover to the moon to collect helium-3. We are going to go all out. We are going to go all out to have fusion. And Russia has said the same thing. International cooperation. Read what was said by Russian President Vladimir Putin. All out for fusion energy. Iran is an oil country. It's like oil is their main commodity. Iran says we are going to go all out for fusion energy, right? Iran funds fusion energy research like crazy. All the economies in the world where profits are not in command, where the state is controlling the means of production, are saying all out for fusion energy. We need fusion energy badly. Fossil fuels isn't going to work. The oil-based economic order is not going to work. And in the West, no. A lot of people don't even know what fusion energy is. A lot of people don't even know what it is. Furthermore, the Wall Street bankers and monopolists don't want to give up their power. They don't want to give up their power. It's that simple. And if the world economy was no longer centered around oil, it would no longer be centered around Wall Street and London. They won't tolerate it. They will not tolerate it. So they're pessimists. And they want to move backwards. China wants to move forward. Russia wants to move forward. Iran wants to move forward. Venezuela wants to move forward. I got some other stuff to say about Venezuela later. Folks, there is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to profits. There is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to profits. But the limit to profits is approaching faster. It is right there on the horizon. The automation crisis and mass unemployment, the climate change debacle and disaster, super hurricanes, folks, goodness gracious. The limit to profits is right in front of our face. We are living in the goddamn the limit to profits. We are living in the limit to profits. This is the end. This is the end. This is the moment where the profit system has to be gotten rid of. There is a limit to profits, and it's upon us. We cannot have a profits-based economy any longer, but we can have growth. We can have growth. We can do what human beings naturally do. We can expand our living conditions. We can build a better life. We can resume human progress. Human history can resume. The reason that we are facing a global crisis right now is because there is no limit to growth. There's only a limit to profits. And in the face of profits playing themselves out on a global scale, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Folks, I hope you enjoyed all of that. Wow, that's my worldview. That's how I see things, right? This is the moment that we are living in historically.